Hi, my name is Jai.
Hi, my name is Vibhor.
Today we are going to talk about the course Scaling Ventures, which we've just completed here at BITSoM. We were fortunate enough to be taught by Professor Gad Allon, who is the Professor of Operations and Director at the Wharton School of Business. So Vibhor, I'd like to ask you, since you've taken the course, what made you take Scaling Ventures here at BITSoM?
So, Jai, as you know, I've come here with a couple of years of work experience, and I spent a considerable time working in a startup, and that too in the CEO's team. So, I've seen very closely how you take a company from stage 0 to stage 1. However, I was not fortunate enough to witness how you take a company from stage 1 to stage N. And that's probably why I joined Scaling Ventures. And in fact, the course did really teach me the big difference, between growth and scale.
Yeah, before even I remember this concept very clearly. We learned that scaling is actually when you're able to increase your revenues at a rate that is much faster than your costs, and only then it is beneficial to scale. The framework that we learned for this purpose was coincidentally also named Scale, where S is for scalability, where we assess whether the firm is ready to scale, and we consider factors such as supply side economies of scale, demand side economies of scale, switching costs and learning curves. Then we come to constraints as to how the firms can optimize their resources and make themselves scalable. Then there's the factor of alignment. In alignment, we see whether the business functions such as the business model, the revenue model, the value proposition, and the processes that are set in the firm are aligned with each other, and that the firm is able to find a product market fit. Then in terms of leadership, we also learned that the things that employees and leadership personnel try to find in a startup is very different from a matured firm. So to be able to align these two differences is very difficult and important to quantify when the firm is scaling. And efficiency is essentially finding a predictable path to profitability, which I believe is very necessary in terms of scaling.
Fair enough.
So Vibhor, what were your key takeaways from this course?
So, Jai, I think I had like two key takeaways. Firstly, there's a difference between tacit knowledge and codified knowledge. So, what tacit knowledge basically means is that, so suppose you're doing a task for a very long time, and obviously you get better with time and stuff such that the task feels as though it's involuntary. However, when you're looking at scaling ventures, you need to understand that a lot of other people need to do the same task, and they might not be as efficient as you. So to make them as efficient, you start looking at those tasks, that particular process in a task based format, so that others can do it. So that's essentially moving from a people based approach to a process based approach, and that's essentially that you need to transition from tacit knowledge to codified knowledge. My second key takeaway was that, when you look at startups in particular, any metric can be hacked. So you essentially need to look at metrics with sort of a trade-off. So for example, if I have to explain it, like if you look at, for example, a disbursement agent, someone who disburses loans, you can't just look at a single metric of loans disbursed. That will be a very wrong metric to evaluate his performance. So you also have to look at NPAs or average ticket size in order to correctly assess his performance. And that's essentially you need to look at when you're looking to scale a venture.
Got it.
Jay, I need to ask you a question. So, was there any learning which was not related to scaling of ventures, but was still, taught in class, or some key takeaways of that sort?
Yeah, I remember. So not exactly related to scaling like you asked, but one key insight that I got was he mentioned that the products and the services that have a high frequency of purchase generally tend to have very high elasticity. So for example, when you're buying a TV, you really don't care whether it's 10% higher or 10% lower. But for stuff like breads, eggs, it actually hurts when the price increases by a small amount. Another thing that I learned was the smile curve. So it essentially shows that either you have an interface with the customer or you have an interface with the patent. In between, the manufacturer always and mostly gets squeezed and is left with very low margins. One final thing that was very insightful, I thought, was that he taught us to always be the limiting resource, and the most valuable resource should be the one constraint. So therefore, you are maximizing the value and the output from every other resource if your most valuable resource is the one that is the constraint.
So essentially, Jay, what you're trying to say is that you should always be the bottleneck in whatever organization you're working in.
Actually, so then you are indispensable, you are irreplaceable.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Jay, like I know that we had a chance of having dinner with Professor once. So what were the discussions like? What were some key takeaways of those discussions?
Oh, yeah, nice that you brought it up. It was a very enlightening discussion, and we talked about stuff that we wouldn't generally talk about in class.
Right.
So one of the things that he brought up was how ChatGPT interprets language. So we were talking about ChatGPT in general, and then he brought out a concept of philosophy, wherein there are two ways of interpreting language. One is the meaning way of interpreting language, and the other being the usage.
Right.
So if you really think about it, ChatGPT doesn't understand the meaning of many words, but it knows where to use those words.
Correct.
So in terms of interpreting the meaning, ChatGPT fails, but in terms of interpreting the usage, ChatGPT is very good. And with the development of good AIs and proper AIs that work towards a certain function, ChatGPT can serve the function of interpreting the commands, but then assign those particular niche tasks to other plugins. For example, that is happening with Wolfram Alpha and multiple e-commerce sites as well. Since we went together, what were a few things that you derived from the same conversation?
So Jay, I think lately there's been a lot of buzz going on around, work-life balance or company culture and stuff like that. So, Professor, as you know, had served in the military, I think, for 4 years. And, he told us a story where for a couple of weeks, he was dropped in the forest without water, without food, without mobile phone, without a watch, without basically anything. And those two weeks, the only way to keep himself motivated was through his own work. And that kind of led me to think that it's all in the mind. Like, as long as you can make yourself believe that you're going to get through the next 2 weeks or through whatever you're going through, you can push yourself through it. And that, I think, is the real meaning of culture, that when your company is down, when your back is against the wall, to be able to pull yourself out of the situation and kind of excel in life. So since he's also from a military background, I think we also spoke about some of the research that he does.
Yeah.
And one of the research that he's doing is, so he's basically, these guys collect a lot of data, like physical data via sensors from fighter jet pilots.
Okay.
And based on that data, they kind of nudge an inexperienced pilot versus an experienced pilot. So, for example, when a aircraft is taking a turn, the G-force is very high. So an experienced pilot usually takes a deep breath before he takes the turn, whereas an inexperienced pilot does not, and turns out that his heartbeat is usually higher at the end of the turn. So these guys want to use that metadata to kind of nudge the pilot into taking a deeper breath before taking that turn. And it's all very interesting, I think.
Yeah, tying in what you told me about the culture and how professor's mentality is, he was telling us about his schedule in college as well. And even when he was here with us teaching 6 hours of classes, he went back right to his hotel and he had 5 to 6 hours of meeting lined up with respect to the schedule that he had in the US. So the idea that you mentioned, that it is in the mind and he should know that he is able to do it and he is able to perform, and it is his duty to perform at that level and that efficiency. So I think that is some of the things that I learned from.
I think we were very lucky to have been taught by Professor Gad Allon, and I think I'm going to remember this course for the rest of my life. Thank you, Jai, for having me here. I think this was great.
Most definitely. Thank you. Thank you, Vibhor.